Jack's decision to take up a job at the local gas station seemed like a sensible move. The pay was decent, and the night shift promised quiet moments to catch up on reading or complete college assignments. But soon, Jack found himself trapped in a nightmarish experience that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On his first night, the gas station was bathed in the glow of fluorescent lights that seemed to hum with an eerie intensity. The distant hum of cars passing by on the highway provided a faint background noise, while the rustling of leaves in the nearby woods added a touch of unease. Despite his initial apprehensions, Jack settled into his post behind the counter, surrounded by snacks, beverages, and lottery tickets. The hours ticked by slowly as Jack attended to the few customers who stopped by for fuel or snacks. As the clock struck midnight, the surroundings took on a different aura. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The distant traffic noises faded into a haunting silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that rattled the station's windows. It was during one of these gusts of wind that Jack first caught a glimpse of a figure outside. The man was wearing a mask that obscured his features, dressed in tattered clothing that seemed out of place. Jack's heart raced, and he hesitated to make eye contact, but as he looked away and then back, the figure had vanished. He dismissed it as a trick of the mind, fatigue mixed with the imagination playing tricks. However, the man with the mask became a recurring presence. Night after night, Jack would spot him standing just beyond the reach of the gas station's lights. Sometimes he would be closer, his masked face now barely visible through the darkness, and sometimes he would be farther away, disappearing into the woods like a wisp of smoke. Jack's fear began to grow, and his once mundane night shifts transformed into a nerve-wracking ordeal. Jack tried to confide in his coworkers about the mysterious figure, but they brushed it off as a joke or attributed it to the isolated nature of the gas station. Determined to find some solace, Jack decided to investigate the woods during his breaks. Armed with a flashlight, he ventured into the trees, hoping to uncover the truth behind the enigmatic man. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the shadows seemed to grow thicker, and the wind whispered unsettling secrets. He stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its windows shattered, and its walls sagging under the weight of time. Cautiously, Jack stepped inside, his flashlight's beam revealing a scene frozen in time, dusty furniture, cobwebs, and a sense of lingering despair. Suddenly, the air turned icy, and Jack's flashlight flickered before dying out completely. Darkness engulfed him, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the cabin. Panic surged within him, and he stumbled backward, tripping over debris and crashing through the cabin's rotting door. He fled back to the gas station, his heart pounding in his chest. The next few nights at the gas station were a blur of paranoia and fear. Every shadow seemed to conceal the masked man, every creak of the floorboards a sign of his presence. Jack's sleep became plagued by nightmares, and his waking hours were consumed by dread. His coworkers noticed his deteriorating condition, but their attempts to comfort him fell on deaf ears. One fateful night, as the clock struck midnight, the masked man's presence was more palpable than ever. He stood at the edge of the gas station's parking lot, his mask glinting in the dim light. Jack's fear had reached its peak, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure. Slowly, the man raised his hand, beckoning Jack to come closer. Driven by a mix of terror and curiosity, Jack stepped outside the gas station, the cold air prickling his skin. He moved closer to the man, his heart thundering in his chest. The masked man remained silent, his mask concealing any emotions or intentions. With each step, Jack felt an inexplicable connection to this mysterious figure, as if they were bound by a sinister force. As Jack stood before the masked man, a shiver ran down his spine. He realized that this was a moment of truth, a confrontation that would reveal the nature of his tormentor. Slowly, the man lifted his mask, revealing a face that mirrored Jack's own. Shock and horror surged through him, and he stumbled back, unable to comprehend the impossible sight before him. Before Jack could make sense of the situation, the world around him seemed to warp and distort. Reality twisted, and he found himself back at the gas station, behind the counter as if nothing had happened. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, the distant traffic noises resumed, and the shadows no longer held the same menacing presence. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare woven from the stress of the night shift and his exhausted mind? Jack couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain, he could never shake the feeling that the man with the mask was more than a mere figment of his imagination. And as he continued to work the night shift at the gas station, he couldn't help but wonder if he had escaped a sinister fate or merely glimpsed the edges of a reality beyond comprehension. In the quiet stillness of the night, Mark embarked on his new journey as a night shift security guard at the town's historical museum. The grand building stood as a testament to the past, housing artifacts and relics that whispered secrets of eras long gone. Mark's job was simple: patrol the dimly lit halls, ensure the security of the museum's treasures, and report any suspicious activities. On his first night, Mark strolled through the echoing corridors, his footsteps reverberating off the marble floors. The pale moonlight filtered in through the tall windows, casting eerie shadows that danced across the exhibits. As he navigated his rounds, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a sensation that prickled at the back of his neck. Hours passed, and the silence was occasionally broken by the soft creaking of ancient floorboards beneath his feet. Mark tried to dismiss the sounds as mere consequences of an old building settling, but the unease persisted. He attributed it to his new environment and the stories he'd heard about people's minds playing tricks on them in the dead of night. As the clock neared midnight, Mark found himself standing before the museum's prized possession, a centuries-old suit of armor that had once belonged to a valiant knight. The moonlight bathed the armor in an ethereal glow, and Mark couldn't help but marvel at its craftsmanship. But then, a faint whisper seemed to float through the air, carrying words he couldn't quite make out. He turned around sharply, his heart racing, but the hallway was empty, save for the statues and artifacts that watched in silence. Shaking off his nerves, Mark continued his rounds. Each passing minute seemed to stretch longer than the last, and the weight of the building's history bore down on him. Just as he was about to dismiss the noises as mere imagination, he heard it again, a distinct sound, like the clinking of metal against stone. This time, it was followed by the distant echo of footsteps. Mark's pulse quickened, and he followed the sound, winding his way through the labyrinthine corridors. The footsteps seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the museum, where the exhibits grew older and more obscure. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath as he exhaled. He rounded a corner and froze. Before him stood a figure in the dim light, dressed in attire that seemed to belong to another century. It was the suit of armor he had admired earlier, but now it stood animated, as though brought to life by some unseen force. The clinking of metal was accompanied by the rhythmic thud of its footsteps as it advanced toward him. Mark's voice caught in his throat as he stumbled back, his mind unable to comprehend the sight before him. The armor's visor was closed, hiding whatever lay within. Panic surged through his veins as he fumbled for his radio, desperate to call for help. And then, just as suddenly as it had come to life, the armored figure froze. The air seemed to still, and the museum fell into a heavy silence. The figure turned, retracing its steps before stopping in front of the suit of armor's display. As Mark watched in disbelief, the armor slumped back into its display, lifeless once more. The moonlight lost its eerie intensity, and the strange noises ceased. Trembling, Mark cautiously approached the exhibit. Peering at the placard, he read the brief history of the knight who had worn the armor, a tale of bravery and sacrifice on the battlefield. From that night onward, Mark continued his shifts at the museum, but he never spoke of what he had witnessed. The strange noises persisted, but they no longer filled him with dread. Instead, he saw them as whispers from the past, the echoes of stories longing to be heard. And as he walked through the museum's halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that the spirits of the past were watching over their history, making their presence known in the only way they could. In the heart of the city, nestled between the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers, stood an enormous mall. It was a labyrinth of shops, arcades, and eateries, a place that came alive during the day with the hum of shoppers and the laughter of children. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon took its place, a different atmosphere settled over the mall, one that only those who worked the night shift truly understood. David was a young man with dreams as vast as the city itself. Fresh out of college and seeking employment, he found himself applying for a position at the mall. Little did he know that his seemingly ordinary job would soon thrust him into the depths of an eerie and unsettling mystery. At first, his shifts were uneventful. David would clock in as the sun was setting, joining a small crew of dedicated night workers. There was Maria, a friendly cleaning lady with a heart of gold, and Mike, a burly security guard who had seen his fair share of strange occurrences over the years. The camaraderie between them helped alleviate the eerie feeling that inevitably crept in when the mall's lights dimmed and the echoing footsteps of daytime shoppers faded away. As the weeks passed, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Merchandise began disappearing from the stores. It started with small items, a piece of jewelry here, a gadget there. The shop owners were puzzled, chalking it up to shoplifting during the day. But David knew better. He had a gut feeling that something sinister was lurking in the shadows of the mall. One fateful night, while David was on his routine rounds, he heard a faint whisper echoing through the corridor. He stopped in his tracks, straining to make out the words. The voice was haunting, distant yet chillingly close. He followed the sound, which seemed to lead him deeper into the belly of the mall. The path twisted and turned, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional creak of aging infrastructure. David's heart raced, his footsteps echoing louder than he intended. The further he ventured, the more he realized he was in an area of the mall rarely visited, a forgotten corner where outdated shops lay abandoned, hidden from the prying eyes of shoppers. Then, a glimmer caught his eye, a shard of glass on the floor, reflecting the dim light. David's heart sank as he realized the glass was from a shattered display case. He knew he was getting closer. He followed the trail of shattered glass and broken dreams, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the mystery. Finally, he reached a dimly lit chamber, its walls adorned with stolen items, the spoils of a phantom thief's nocturnal exploits. And there, seated on a makeshift throne of stolen goods, was a figure shrouded in darkness. The figure turned its gaze toward David, revealing piercing eyes that seemed to hold the weight of years gone by. "Who are you?" David stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down David's spine. "I am the Nightwalker," it hissed, its voice dripping with malevolence. "I've roamed these halls for longer than you can imagine, unseen and unheard." David's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. This was the robber who had been haunting the mall for over 5 years. The Nightwalker recounted tales of loneliness and desperation, of a once ordinary man who had become consumed by the shadows, seeking solace in the stolen treasures of the mall. As the Nightwalker spoke, a realization dawned on David. He had the power to end this cycle of theft and despair. With empathy in his heart, he reached out to the Nightwalker, offering a chance at redemption. The figure hesitated, its eyes flickering with uncertainty. Slowly, it stood, its stolen treasures clattering to the ground. Over time, David's friendship with the Nightwalker grew. With the stolen items returned to their rightful owners, the mall's curse began to lift. The shops flourished once again, and the eerie feeling that had gripped the night shift workers began to fade. David's experience in the mall had taught him that even in the darkest corners, there could be a glimmer of light. The Nightwalker's story served as a reminder that compassion and understanding could break even the most haunting of cycles. And as the first rays of dawn illuminated the once ominous halls, David knew that he had not only found a job, but had also discovered a purpose: to bring hope to the shadows and to remind the world that even the most unsettling stories could find their way to redemption.